It's August 13th, 2021. The world is about to witness the last entry to the entire series and films of Neon Genesis Evangelion. But wait, we already had the End of Evangelion. This was supposed to be the moment where we said goodbye to this world, to this franchise, to these characters. We already had two endings and both complemented each other seamlessly. This was supposed to be the perfect ending, but no. This wasn't the end, there was more. And that's exactly what I'll be talking about today. I'll be talking about these new films and especially the new End of Evangelion, and why I don't think it's a masterpiece. Hideaki Anno was born in Ube, Yamaguchi in 1960. Having a troubled childhood, this complex Japanese young boy resorted to television as his means of escapism. He watched Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and so much more. But he was especially fascinated by the direction that Akio Jisoji took with these franchises. The unconventional framing that was so characteristic from Jisoji influenced Anno massively in what he would later do in his life. And it was during this era that would eventually lead him to become an animator in the early 80s. After making the critically acclaimed Daikon 3 and 4 opening animations, it opened the doors for his professional career in Japanese animation, which ultimately led to him meeting two of the greatest minds of this incredibly imaginative industry, Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. This gave him the opportunity to work on some of the best works of art made during that decade, and shortly after co-founding Gainax, he directed his first anime. Being heavily influenced by Aim for the Ace and many mecha series such as Gundam and Ideon, Gunbuster was focused on showing the sacrifices of war and how it deeply affected its main characters. This 6 OVA episode mecha series was the beginning of us diving into Anno's psyche, and also the beginning of him doing things that were almost inexplicable, such as the 6th episode shown in black and white, which is still one of the greatest experiences I've ever witnessed. And afterwards, he ended up being the lead director for the anime series Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. But it was here that our legendary creator would eventually succumb to the depths of human despair. After being removed from the creative control he had on Nadia, he fell into a long and deep depression. And it was this depression that would lead him to make one of the best series of all time. As mentioned in my previous two videos, both the series and the film have affected me on a very deep and personal level, precisely because Anno poured all of his thoughts and suffering into each character. And so there were many elements that I could profoundly relate with. Shinji's need for love, Asuka hiding her suffering, Rei not wanting to be controlled. I saw myself in these characters. It brought me closer to the creator. And then, with both endings, I felt everything in me. Happiness, loneliness, confused, understood. It was exactly what I needed to experience, and to this day, these are still some of my favorite endings ever. I was fulfilled, but Anno wasn't. Since the year 2000, he had wanted to retell the story of Evangelion. He felt something was still missing. Maybe due to the production issues that befell Gainax during the last portion of the series. Maybe due to its nihilism found in the End of Evangelion. He must have felt so disgusted with life at the time that he must have looked back and saw something he did not entirely enjoy. As if there was a more fitting end for him. He needed something. He needed more. And precisely 10 years later, he would give us more. In 2006, he founded Studio Kara in order to properly create the Rebuilds of Evangelion. He brought with him many animators from Gainax and hired new ones that were big fans of his previous work. And in 2007, the first Rebuild film was released. The first film starts off exactly like the first scene of the original series, except for one major thing. The first shot of the film shows a red sea, which is very odd. In the original series, the first episode clearly shows a blue sea, and in the last scene of the End of Evangelion, the sea was red, which might mean that this film isn't a remake, but possibly a sequel of some sorts. And it was this aspect of the first two films that had many fans curious to see what Anno was trying to do, because they were almost identical to the original series. But with the ending of the second film and with the entirety of the third one, it was clear that this was not the same series anymore. There seemed to be a bigger objective. Why did the second film have that impactful and emotional ending? Why was the third film so incredibly different than everything that came before it? And most importantly, who was this new character? Who was Mari? But by this point, something was apparent to me. I'll be very honest, these films weren't as good as what Anno had done with the original series and its subsequent film, The End of Evangelion. At least, not to me. I wasn't a big fan of the first two films, retreading too much of what the original series had offered us. And every time I was watching each scene, I couldn't help but think that the original had done it way better. I didn't want to think like this. I didn't want to constantly compare. But when you have almost the exact same scenes, I can't help but feel like I was watching something almost unnecessary. Especially since I prefer the use of the animation found in the 90s. The character models, the color palette, the fluidity of the movements. Studio Gainax and its animators were at the top of their game, and it still shows. But this isn't to say that there aren't good things with the first two films too. I really enjoyed how it uses CG for the buildings to give more perspective and depth to the world these characters live in, which were beautifully juxtaposed with the 2D worlds of the characters. And this wasn't the only visual aspect of the rebuilds that I found rather enticing to watch. With the use of digital animation, it was clear that there were a lot of advantages, and lighting was for sure one of them. Especially since in 2007, with the release of 5 cm per second, we were shown exactly how backgrounds, color and lighting could be used to such great effect. And we saw a glimpse of this with these two rebuild films. But the transition that was made towards digital animation was rough. Not just because animators were getting used to this new form of animation, but also because the anime industry suffered a lot from the bubble bursting of the early 90s, and the period between 2000 and 2010 was when it suffered the most. It was only during the late 2000s that digital animation was starting to improve its quality, and it was during that time that Evangelion 1.0 and 2.0 were released. So even though they were still incredibly well animated considering what the animation industry was going through, I still felt like it wasn't up to the same quality that was present in the End of Evangelion. And that was certainly jarring to me. Another element that I didn't love was the editing and pacing. With the original series, there were times when something unexpected happened that completely threw us off. You either had long shots to convey something truly meaningful between two characters, or you had fast-paced editing to convey one psychological state. So when you watch the same scenes unfold normally, it becomes less interesting to me. The best example of this is the elevator scene. In the original series, I absolutely adore how long it takes for Rei to reply to Asuka, but in the second rebuild film, she replies immediately. Now, to be fair, this also has its intrigue, because it also shows how this Rei is different from the one found in episode 22, one that has already shown to be much more human-like whenever she interacts with Shinji. And this is confirmed when she stops Asuka from hitting her. This added layer makes us think more about who she is. But considering that the original scene is so iconic due to its execution, when you remove it, the interesting additions of the new dialogue and character dynamics lose its power. This isn't to say that it should have been the exact same, but rather I felt like something different could have been done from an execution standpoint. Maybe even have a long shot happen when Rei stops Asuka, and thus having the visuals elevate even more what's really going on. Not only to make Rei's new decision that more impactful, but also forcing us to really grasp what Asuka is feeling when she comes to realize how much harder Rei had worked to satisfy Shinji when compared to her own efforts. But again, I'm not its creator. Maybe what I'm saying makes no sense, and maybe I just love the original series too much. but this is why I think retreading what the original series has done with only minor changes can be an issue. That is, until the last act of the second film. This is the first time where these films actually do something that I find to be truly brilliant, driving us to see Shinji react in a way that is both super fascinating from a character and plot standpoint, and does so by having the visuals take over in such an exquisite manner. And it all starts when Asuka puts herself forward to pilot Eva Unit 3. Just like it happened originally, the Eva turns out to be an angel. But instead of Toji being the one to suffer the consequences, it's one of the most pivotal characters in the whole series. Meaning, Shinji witnesses Asuka nearly dying 2/3 in the original plot of Evangelion. This then leads to the finale of the film, where our protagonist does whatever it takes to save Rei Ayanami. He almost lost Asuka and he can't bear to lose Rei in the process. He doesn't want any other clone of hers to replace her. He wants to save this one, the one that cooked for him, the one that wanted to bring Shinji and his father closer together. Our protagonist has to save her, even if it means sacrificing everything else. And suddenly, both Shinji and Rei accidentally triggered the beginning stages of the third impact, in one of the most heartfelt moments of the entire franchise. The color, the lighting, the music, it all just comes together wonderfully to make us feel everything. The world is about to come to an end. Again. With the release of the third film, Evangelion took a completely unexpected turn. One that made us feel uneasy. One that made us question everything that came before it. What was promised to us at the end of the second film was not here. None of it. The events that transpired weren't immediately after the near third impact. It was 14 years later. When you think you finally come to understand all of Neon Genesis Evangelion, Anno decides to dump on us even more questions. What was this convoluted plot? Why is everyone acting so strange? What happened during the past 14 years? Why did no one explain anything to Shinji? A lot of these questions had many fans disappointed with the third film. Many felt like they were being betrayed, as if the characters were acting completely nonsensical, as if it was too much new information to shove into one film that was nearing the end. And despite all of these legitimate concerns, I still enjoyed this film more than the previous two. Bear in mind that I am also the same person who thinks The Last Jedi is by far the best Disney Star Wars film.
Don't.
Who thinks The Last of Us Part 2 is a freaking masterpiece.
Stop it. You.
Who loves the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Don't be a hater, just relax.
And the reason for this is simple. I really value the creator's imprint in a work of art. It's why I prefer the ending of the original series to the one found in the End of Evangelion. Because the psychological aspect that Anno puts us through in the last 2 episodes is all I ever want from this medium. Ones that had everything to do with the themes laid out in the entire series and beautifully dives into each character's state of mind. This isn't to say that the third Rebuild film successfully reaches these heights, far from it. But when compared to the first film and the majority of the second film, I at least felt like Anno was trying to say something. First of all, the aspect ratio of the film goes from 16:9 to CinemaScope format. This is clearly due to Anno's current preference in doing live action films rather than anime. In fact, it was already apparent in the 90s that our legendary creator was starting to explore beyond the world of animation. You could even see him wanting to go this path with the deleted segment from the End of Evangelion. And after he made the film, he didn't know what to do. It was then when former president of Studio Ghibli, Toshio Suzuki, told Anno to pursue live action. And so, he did. He stepped away from his signature style found in the Eva series and began to be more curious in what a real camera had to offer. And this became evident in Evangelion 3.0. What really moved me was what happened during the second act of the film, when Shinji decides to join NERV. The shots had this enormous scope, having our protagonist be really small and everything else be so huge, as if the emptiness around Shinji emphasized his loneliness. And this is even more noticeable when he realizes that the Rei Ayanami that brought him to NERV was not the same one that he ended up saving at the end of the second film. One who showed so much affection towards our protagonist, as opposed to this one who seemed so stoic and void of life. This sends Shinji into an even bigger depression, and the shots convey this so stunningly. But what's truly great is how a seemingly different film from everything that came before it manages to hit all of the same beats of the original series. If we recall, it was at this point in the story where Shinji had a lot of difficulty connecting with everyone. He also realized that Rei was different than before. Asuka was really distant from him, and Misato wasn't able to open herself to our protagonist. But then suddenly, there is one person who is able to be there for him, and that person is Kaoru Nagisa. All of the plot points were the same, but the execution and the actual narrative was very different. For instance, the piano scene is one of my favorite moments from the entire franchise. How the non-existent camera flies around Shinji and Kaoru whilst they play together. It's compelling, it's beautiful, it's cinema. This is the strength of the third film. And it's also here where we see the true power of digital animation really come to fruition. The color palette is gorgeous, really enhancing Shinji's loneliness, but also conveying magnificently the bond that our protagonist has with Kaoru. And it's this relationship between these two that was so needed. To actually spend time with these characters, to really get to see their relationship grow, especially considering that we only got to see a glimpse of their connection in episode 24. But as much as I love the execution, the film still has its issues. The action scenes, for instance, were filled with long shots trying to show everything that was going on, wanting to convey a new style of action that Anno had not shown before, but they end up feeling very drawn out and take up too much runtime. Even worse is how convoluted the plot has become, making the narrative really confused and removing focus from the actual drama, and thus takes away from the intimacy and poignant character moments that I love so much about this film. But what really disheartened me was the ending, because in the original, it's Shinji that has to kill Kaoru. One where our protagonist is faced with two choices. He either lets the world be destroyed in order to save the only genuine connection he ever had, or he saves the world by killing the only person who is able to be there for him. And the way it's executed is masterful, again through a still frame that is played for almost a minute, forcing us to listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, to Ode to Joy. It's cinematic perfection, but in the third film, Shinji seems to have way less of an impact on his death. It's still well executed, but by removing Shinji's decision on whether Kaoru lives or dies also lessens the importance of absolute depression he then finds himself in. So, when the film ends, we understand that he's in the same state of loss found in the very last scene of episode 24. But I was just unable to connect with our protagonist as much as I wanted to, especially considering that Evangelion 3.0 leaves us with so many questions. And now, all everyone wanted was a last film to shed some light, to answer everything, to quash all of our doubts. The problem was, the last film was delayed constantly. Years went by, we grew older, we stopped being children and became adults. We had lives of our own, and then 9 years later, the last film was finally released. Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 can be divided into 3 parts. A first act that dives deep into Shinji, Asuka, and especially Rei. A second act which is all about action and trying to stop the additional impact. And a third act which once again makes us dive into the human instrumentality project. Let's talk about the first act, or what I like to call the Studio Ghibli act. This section of the film might seem like Anno's biggest departure from everything that he has ever done, but once again, this is not exactly true. When we go through something traumatic in our lives, we choose to run away from it. We choose to not confront it. To live, to survive, our human minds are conditioned to clamp away our trauma so that we can keep moving forward. We are scared of it. We don't want to be near it. It feeds into our insecurities. It feeds into our lowest of times and brings the worst out of us. But with time, we learn to accept it more and more. We learn to value who we used to be despite the horrible things we went through, and it eventually makes us reborn. This is what Anno does with the first act of the last film. He returns to his younger self, of the one who worked alongside Miyazaki, of the one who learned about the importance of family, nature, and peacefulness throughout his films, of having a female protagonist developing these stories, of the one who made Nadia the secret of blue water, and ultimately led to his depression. Anno was scared of it, scared of going back to those days, but now he needed to convey this part of himself, as if he was rediscovering something about who he was, one that he kept locked away inside because it was what pushed him towards depression. And this is exquisitely portrayed through two characters, through Shinji tackling his deep depression, but especially through Rei learning about what life has to offer. She was starting to learn how to live a normal life, learning how to take care of herself, finding about how life starts, knowing how to say thank you, how to bond with someone, and how to say goodbye. She was free to do whatever she wanted. And it's also thanks to her that Shinji is ultimately able to overcome his deep sadness. Our protagonist just wants to be left alone. He feels like he can't do anything to protect anyone, to which he ultimately asks, and Rei replies, and stretches her hand to connect with Shinji. It's here where our protagonist is finally able to grow a little bit, where he starts to leave the despair he was going through, all because this new Rei gave him some insight on something he truly needed. It's like Anno is saying that working on Neon Genesis Evangelion provided him something he needed at the time, and was finally ready to accept that, except for one small problem. We must remember that Rei's purpose is to be Shinji's mother. As long as this world exists, she can never truly be free. As long as Evangelion exists, Anno can never truly be free. And so, by forcibly living a normal life, Rei ends up meeting her demise. Good night, good morning, thank you, goodbye. It's here where we enter the second act of the film, and in my opinion, the least interesting aspect of it. Once again, we are shown the same type of action as shown at the beginning of 3.0. We are confronted with the same type of information and technical jargon that seems so convoluted that deviates from the characters' motivations rather than making us understand it more, and lasts way too long for my liking. But we at least get to understand why Misato and Asuka seem so hesitant to connect with Shinji. The first felt like she wasn't being the mother that she should have been, to her son that she abandoned, and to Shinji, who she wasn't able to save for 14 long years. She felt like a terrible person, a terrible parent, and wasn't able to open up to our protagonist because of the guilt that she couldn't deal with. And Asuka was mad at Shinji because our protagonist wasn't able to do anything when her life was in danger during the last section of the second film. It's not that she wanted him to save her, it's that she wanted him to do something, anything. It could have been to save her, or it could have been to kill her, but Shinji didn't do anything at all. It's this reason alone that makes her feel so much resentment for him, especially considering the words that she blurts out next. This is the first time in the entire franchise that someone has been totally honest about their feelings. And it's this honesty that is so characteristic of these rebuilds, explaining everything. Things that were once subtle now were being told to us face to face. And this is especially evident in the last act of this film, the moment where we finally enter the last ever human instrumentality project, the moment where we finally get to really understand who Anno is in this day and age. I just couldn't believe what Anno was trying to say. I felt like he was trolling us, but he wasn't. He was saying the truth. He was expressing what he truly felt at this point in his life. And no better is that shown than with Shinji and Gendo's conversation. After 26 years, we finally get the confrontation between father and son we have always wanted. And to explain this further, we need to go back. Our creator had a difficult relationship with his father. Takuya Anno was a man devoid of life ever since he lost his leg in a freakish accident. He felt like the world was against him and thus distanced himself from everyone, including his own son. Anno had no means to connect with him, except for one, through the art of telling stories visually. He was fascinated by how mechas could lose their arms or legs in the process. It motivated him to do the exact same thing in Neon Genesis Evangelion, to bring him closer to the most mysterious figure in his life. But he was never able to have that one conversation, that one moment where he could have truly connected with him. And so, Shinji and Gendo were never able to have that either. But our creator needed more. He needed to have that talking to, and he was only able to do that once the mysterious figure vanished, once Anno was able to become his father. He wasn't a young boy anymore. He wasn't 30 years old anymore. He was 60. He had a wife, and he finally knew how the conversation would go. Gendo had to be the one sat down in the train, and Shinji had to be the one to help him. It was a role reversal. It was closure for Shinji, for Anno, to place ourselves in the shoes of our fathers, and our fathers in our own shoes. That we were not so different, that we were in fact genuinely alike. And it's also here that Gendo realizes the most important aspect of his obsession, that Yui, Shinji's mother, was inside his son all along. He didn't need to create an additional impact for that to happen. All he needed was to be there for his son. It's the exact same character development found in the End of Evangelion, only with way more depth and understanding. Understanding that could only happen with time, with age. It's such a beautiful scene. Seeing Gendo's backstory, seeing the absolute mastery of the juxtaposition of colors, seeing the simplicity of the drawings. It gave us everything we needed to understand the core theme of Neon Genesis Evangelion, the theme of loneliness. What is loneliness? It can be a terrifying feeling, the feeling that you're all alone and there is no one there for you. Or worse, the feeling that you're surrounded by people who make you feel alone. People who could be your own parents. And thus, you close yourself even more. There is no one that can understand you. There is no one that can be there for you. So, you find something outside of your reality to make you happy. You find some sort of escapism. You find the imaginary worlds that have been created by others. It could be a young boy that is so strong in his willpower that he will defy anyone in front of him, or a tensei showcasing his hidden ability on the court. It could even be someone pursuing his purpose in life through someone else, or a young man finding something, finding someone that makes us cry, that makes us connect with what we see on the screen, and we want it more. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to you. But most importantly, this is what happened to Anno. He found escapism through Tetsujin, through Ultraman, through Kamen Rider, through Gundam, through Ideon, through the amazing works of art from Akio Jisoji, through the depressing and dark mind of Yoshiyuki Tomino. And then he gave us Neon Genesis Evangelion. It was our escapism, to feel less lonely, to feel like we could find some sort of connection, only for that to be stripped away from us in the end of Evangelion, because it was a connection that wasn't real. But whilst Anno had so much disgust for us in 1997, in 2021 his response was very different, because what was essential was for us to understand what he ended up finding in his life. Finding something. Finding someone. Throughout all of these films, there was one character that was brand new. Another female pilot that dropped onto Shinji's lap during the second film. One that felt like she was thrusted upon us. And it's that same person that ended up being the key factor for these new films. What is love? We try to find it. We try to pursue it. We think it will solve everything in our lives, but every time we come close to it, we get hurt. And we realize we were lied to. We were told that finding someone would be the very thing that could solve all of our issues. But in reality, it just made us suffer even more. It just made us more cynical, more discontent with life. No, love wasn't the answer. It can never be the answer. If it was, then why do we feel pain? Why do we suffer? Why were we fed these lies? Was it to make us more empty inside? To make us more vulnerable? But what for? To take advantage of us? To make us do things we don't want to force us to live a meaningless life? If that's the case, then why love? Why live? What is life for, if not for love? What is love for, if not for life? These are the very thoughts that plague so many of us, and all of this leads back to the very idea of depression, of happiness, of trauma, of loneliness, because the very thing that gives us life is love. The love from our parents, the people who are truly there for us, or rather, the people who should be there for us, because if they are not, then how can we truly know what love is? And so, we try to find it in someone else. But the more we pursue it, the further away it is, and the lonelier we get. This is what happens to Shinji throughout the entire series. This is how the End of Evangelion ends. That one bit of connection gave him a glimpse of what love is, but it also seemed to reinforce his absolute despair, his absolute terror. What we don't see though is what happens to someone when they don't look for it, when they're just minding their own business, when they're just simply living, as it happened when Anno's wife suddenly appeared in front of him, and it's that very moment that completely changed his life. Right after Gendo's arc is concluded, Shinji still has to deal with every other character. He understands what he must do and decides to save everyone. He saves Asuka on that fateful beach by also revealing that he used to like her, and thus she's able to move on. He saves Kaoru by letting him know that he can find happiness without needing Shinji to be happy. And now he is able to look beyond our protagonist. He saves Rei Ayanami by not needing her to save himself, and she is now able to live a normal life. Because Shinji doesn't need a mother to be there for him anymore. He doesn't want Evangelion to exist anymore. And thus, he ends up wishing for all of the AV units to be destroyed, for this imaginary world to cease to be, for our escapism to no longer be there for us, because it wasn't real, and it was no longer needed. For Shinji, for Anno, because there is now someone beside him, someone who will be there for him on that fateful beach, the one where everything started, the one where everything ended, slowly losing color, slowly losing animation, just like it happened in the original ending. He was about to succumb to nothingness, but then that someone appears in front of Shinji, the new character, the one that had no development, as opposed to everyone else. And it's her that saves Shinji. But why? Why does Anno do this? It's simple. Mari is a representation of Anno's wife. She showed up in his life completely unexpectedly, just like Mari did in 2.0. And it was thanks to her that Anno was able to have someone be there for him. He feels like he owes so much to her, and that is represented through this new character. One that didn't need any development, because in Anno's eyes, she has no flaws. She is perfect as she is. She was already mature enough to handle life, and ends up being crucial for Shinji's last ever development as a character. It was time to say goodbye to all of Evangelion. It was time to grow up. What does it mean to grow up? Does it mean that we need to man up, to woman up, or is it something more profound? We are taught that life is a journey, but what if that wasn't the case? What if life is simply the conglomeration of the moments we live in, of what we are doing right now? We believe that growing up means that we have to reach something, but that isn't true. Growing up isn't a physical process that we go through, but a mental one, by understanding that pain is a part of life, and once you do, you are able to accept it. Yes, you will hurt. Yes, you will suffer, but that's all right, because you're not looking for answers anymore. You know there are times you will be happy, just like there are times you will be sad. And then you suddenly start to find love within yourself. Once you do that, only then can other people love you. This is the key message of this film. This is Shinji's ultimate development as a character. So when we reach the end of the film, we see our protagonist all grown up, finally in the real world. The curse of Evangelion has finally been broken. And whilst he waits, there is someone that goes up to him. One who recognizes that he is different. One that realizes that he has grown. She is there for him. She will reach out to him. And Shinji accepts the connection he had always wanted and needed. And thus, our protagonist confidently decides to go with her. Both run together on the stairs of the train station, both running through this real world, which happens to be the hometown where Anno was born. The birth of a new life. We have finally reached the last ever scene of Neon Genesis Evangelion. We have gone through so many of its iterations, through its series, its film, and its rebuilds. We have felt everything imaginable, but now this is truly the end. And while I don't necessarily love the rebuilds, I love what Anno was trying to say. I love his honesty. I love who he is now. And I love that he finally has someone who truly loves him, who is truly there for him, and is able to provide so many moments of happiness. Our creator even acknowledges that there will be many people who will prefer the original series, through this one line delivered by Kaoru. I'll miss how you were before, but this is fine too. And that's exactly my sentiment. It's not a masterpiece, and I do think its honesty isn't as impactful as the subtlety and brilliance that came before it. But it has moments that made me genuinely appreciate what it was trying to do, through its visuals that ended up being more and more incredible with each film, through its characters that show more who they really were underneath all of the layers, through its existentialism that were finally resolved in Shinji's mind, in Anno's mind. It's not perfect, but it's exactly what it needed to be, because I'll never forget the feelings I went through. I'll never forget these characters. I'll never forget this imaginary world. And I'll certainly never forget its final scene. Not just because of its powerful message, but also how it reminded me of other works of art that came before it, due to the voice actor that was chosen for grown-up Shinji. One who happens to be the same voice actor for another protagonist. And also due to the singer that ends our film, reminding me when I was a teenager and going through some of my favorite video games of all time. This scene alone impacted me on so many levels. I can't stop thinking about it, for reasons that have everything to do with Evangelion, and for reasons that have nothing to do with it. Ones that are very personal to me. Maybe one day I'll talk about what those reasons are, but that day isn't today. Because right now, all I want is to keep thinking about this film, so that I can keep Evangelion alive for a little while longer. And then there will be a day where I'll be able to leave this imaginary world and confidently enter the real world. Only then will I finally be able to say good night, good morning, thank you, goodbye. Thank you for watching my video. Apologies that this one took such a long time to make, but I was kind of busy this past month and it was the first time making a video as long as this one. I really appreciate all of your patience and I genuinely hope you enjoyed this video. I want to thank all of my patrons for supporting me thus far. I can't believe so many of you have already started to support me. I can't thank you enough. I love making these essays, I truly do. And so, for me to keep making these videos, your support is crucial. And thus, if you want to see more content like this, I would be forever grateful if you could support with any amount you can. It would also mean a lot to me if you could subscribe and hit that like button. And while you're here, why not check out some of the other videos I've made so far. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.